opportunity to show many marvelous drawings that have rarely, if ever, been exhibited was a major motivation for this exhibition. Studying the collection in the UCT Irma Stern Museum made it apparent that Stearns' drawings of nudes constitute a major part of her artistic output, and to ignore them would lead to an incomplete understanding of her body of work. As far as the representation of women is concerned, Stern, like her German contemporaries, challenged traditional ideals of beauty, insisting on physical realism, even introducing deliberately ugly motifs into her art. In particular, like other expressionists, she followed Freud and represented female sexuality as a newly recognized disruptive force in society. Stearns' first exhibition succeeded in shocking the people of Cape Town. The Cape Times expressed its, quote, disgust at the general nastiness of the work and added that, quote, no serious attention need to be paid to this attempt to startle the susceptibilities of Cape Town art lovers, and 2 policemen came to see if the pictures were not indecent. 100 years later, people are still disturbed by this negative representation of women, and there is an ongoing, difficult and contentious debate about representing the sexuality of children as a subject for art. Although Irma Stern began drawing the nude during her academic studies in Berlin, it took her some time to identify it as a complete subject for her art. To do so, apparently, she had to return to studying the model in her studio, first in graphic media and then in gouache and oil paint. With one foot still in Europe, Irma Stern travelled throughout Southeast Africa in the 1920s, looking for subjects that could illustrate her preconceived image of the continent. Her drawing of a seated bather was clearly done on the spot and appears completely spontaneous. When she came to make a painting from such field notes, however, her imagination took over. The body of the bather is idealized and her figure gracefully composed in the picture format against an appropriately serene landscape that was totally absent from the sketch. The change of the drawing into the painting is, in effect, the transformation of life into art. Irma Stearns' drawings of nudes, especially those that were obviously made in a series, perhaps in the same studio session, provide a unique opportunity of virtually watching the artist at work. Stearns' nudes are not portraits. Whether painted or drawn, they usually represent a professional model, and even when they depict a friend, they are never identified. Stearns' nudes are primarily exercises in the language of art. This explains why Stern exhibited few of her nudes, paintings and drawings, in relation to the number she was making in the studio. Stearns' nudes, more than her work in any other genre, show the artist finding a place in one of the important traditions of European art. For Irma Stern, this engagement involved constant experimentation and discovery throughout her long life. While still in Berlin, Stern adopted her mentor Max Pechstein's use of lithography printing in 2 portfolios, Visionen and Dumela Morena Bilder aus Afrika, both published in 1920. Visionen follows Pechstein's style and medium in the depiction of the crisis in European society following the catastrophe of World War I, and Dumela Morena similarly follows Pechstein's more lyrical treatment of people from other cultures, who the German expressionists considered an inspiration in the face of the collapse of European civilization. Stearns' image of Africa in this series, therefore, is preconceived. Irma Stern owned an etching press, which she purchased in 1951. She produced around 9 etchings that year and another one in 1954. Her first prints were strongly influenced by Rembrandt, of whom she owned an etching of a biblical scene, and she seems to have turned to him at the time she was exploring spiritual subjects in her art. Stearns' most sustained use of graphic media is undoubtedly monotype. Her first monotypes are dated 1939, and she worked intermittently in this medium for the rest of her life. Monotypes are made by drawing a design in printer's ink or paint on a plate and pressing this onto a paper surface. Stern seems to have enjoyed the expressive potential of monotype and the balance between control and chance that the medium represented. Irma Stern made sculptures at different points of her life, but her most productive period was around 1936. Sculpture seems to have encouraged Stern to replace the youthful figures of her early African scenes with substantial, mature figures. These bodies could act as vehicles for more substantial meaning. Her sculptures, Awakening, Contemplation, and Grief, that formed the centerpiece of her 1936 exhibition, embody an allegorical dimension that is new in Stern's art, and prophetic of future developments in her painting in both form and content. Irma Stern frequently represented the naked or part-naked woman in some sort of relationship with fruit, in harvesting scenes, exotic picnics, or as props in studio situations. Clearly, the association was meaningful to Stern, if only as affirmation of sensuality. Stern also chose to decorate many of her ceramics, jugs, vases, and plates with nude figures. Stern's ceramics with nudes seem to link the enjoyment of eating with visual beauty, appealing simultaneously to the senses of sight, touch, taste, and, in some music-making nudes, even hearing. Several of Stern's ceramics of nudes were depicted as containers for flowers in her still-life paintings. This role seems to confirm their purpose as exuberant celebrations of life. Some of Stern's ceramics are inspired by Picasso, who she visited in 1950. Others, like Nude in Procession, seem to refer to ancient festivals of pre-classical Mediterranean cultures. Halfway through her long painting life, Irma Stern focused on the nude as a subject for her art in two projects, a proposed book of nudes and a two-day exhibition of ballet and nudes. In the event, no book of nudes was published. It is clear that Irma Stern herself used the nude to experiment, not only with her model's anatomy, but also with color and paint application. The works in this section of the exhibition show the extraordinary wide range of Stern's representation of the nude, in both medium and interpretation, around the time of the book project and Ballet and Nudes exhibition. The critical response to Irma Stern's major nudes of the 1940s was cautious, if not actually hostile. These negative reactions to her nudes would seem to have discouraged Stern from exhibiting many of them at this time, but she did continue to make nudes in her studio, both paintings and graphic works. Stern's nudes, therefore, are unusual in her body of work, in that many were made for her own pleasure and not for the market. In fact, Stern appears to have understood her nudes to be exercises in the language of art, effectively without subject matter, and the critical response to this work, although guarded and negative, also clearly recognized the primacy of aesthetic issues in Stern's nudes. Irma Stern turned towards abstraction in the 1950s, in which she abandoned the style by which she is best known today, her magnificent still lifes, her Zanzibar and Congo works, and her nudes, exchanging an exuberant celebration of material reality for a search for interior values. In fact, Stern disliked abstraction in the sense of non-figurative art intensely, but she certainly reduced or even abstracted her figures at this time. Stern made rather few paintings of nudes in the 50s, and the drawings of nudes she made in that decade used contour line, often in red ballpoint, and swatches of pastel or watercolor, acting more or less independently of each other to give an abstract quality to the naked female figure. Irma Stern made a series of at least 8 nudes in painted frames in 1962, most likely late in that year, as she was convalescing from a serious illness in her hotel room in Alicante, Spain. It seems fitting that Stern should choose to paint the nude in Europe, because it was one of the principal traditions of European art. The painted frames remind the viewer that these are paintings of nudes derived in Stern's imagination from her knowledge of European art history, rather than depictions of actual naked bodies. The beaches of the Riviera allowed Irma to paint the female nude without the use of a hired model, and bathers clearly fired her imagination on her last visit to Europe in 1965. Naked bathers also put her in touch with the nude in the tradition of European art. In fact, it could be said that the examples of Cézanne, Matisse, Picasso, and others effectively allowed Stern to see bathers as a subject with all the various associations of nature and freedom and golden age. Stern realized this theme in several large oil paintings of this time. Additionally, Stern's graphic representation of nudes and bathers on the beach, done hastily to capture movement and avoid trespassing on her subjects as privacy, remind one of the nudes in her journal Paradise, done 40 years before. In fact, these youthful creatures, absorbed in play and pleasure, appear as characters of a new paradise.